Good morning, my friends. I want to say hello on this beautiful Sunday morning, this beautiful sunny Sunday morning here in New Jersey, New York area. In today's morning coffee for the soul, we'll talk about traumas. It's a topic that, again, we have all in certain way been affected by past experiences, by moments that sometimes we can say defined who we are, defined what I was before a certain event and what I have become after a certain event. A trauma, according to all of the scholars and according to the psychological aspect, is really the result of a deeply distressing experience. So some people may go their whole lives and have no symptoms. They may have no, they may not demonstrate that anything so deeply has happened in their lives before that have defined them. But most of us have gone through some type of trauma. Now, a lot of people say that traumas has to be something huge. It has to be results of an act of war. It has to be some kind of an act of God, as far as a hurricane or something that will come and destroy our community or your house, or it could be a physical event. It could be domestic violence or rape or anything as big as that. However, trauma does not have to be one event. It doesn't have to be an isolated event. Trauma, I'm sorry, I'm just looking at my computer so I can share this. A few people have asked to share. But trauma can be something that goes on for quite a long time. Trauma can be something that, especially in domestic violence cases, it's something that yesterday in our group, we have a live group that I participate in. One of the ladies said that she was not really going through any kind of trauma as far as domestic violence because her husband never hits her. Although he does everything else psychologically distressing to her, emotionally, financially, he belittles her. He fits completely the profile on domestic violence. Yet she doesn't believe that she's being that domestic violence is taking place, and she doesn't believe that there's any trauma being caused. So we have to be very careful, because trauma doesn't necessarily mean, again, one isolated event, but it means a lot of times the result of what happens to you. It's that overwhelming amount of stress that usually exceeds someone's ability to cope with it. So we go through a lot of, let's say, tough times. We go through a lot of things that really marks us, who we are, but we can usually deal with it in a healthy way. It doesn't distress us to the point where we're going to show symptoms. We're going to show even physical symptoms. So traumas, what does that and spiritism have in common? What does one have to do with the other? Well, let's first talk about children and children's biggest thing about trauma. Biggest traumas that happens to kids is really abandonment. So when a child feels that he or she is abandoned, when he or she trusted the person that is there to care for them, to take care of them, and then that person no longer is there, or that person is always responding in an unhealthy way, that person is really, I guess, responding without the loving and caring way that a child or someone that's under you in a way, in authority, is expecting. So in Spiritism, we know the importance to be a parent. And we're going to read the Book of the Spirits, and we know how being a parent, you are here to really teach, to guide, and to love all these spirits that God has given you for a certain amount of time. So we begin by really looking at our responsibility as parents. We really began by truly, I'm not going to share because it'll be too long. It'll be really that responsibility as, am I doing my part in my child's life? Am I being present? A lot of times we say, parents will say, I have so much time to work. I have so much time that I have to be at work. I have so many things that I have to do in my lives, and I feel bad that I can't be with my child. I'm not talking about that. We all need to work. These days you need usually both parents working. That is not what we're talking about here as causing trauma to children. But it is the feeling that you will not be there when they need you. You will not be on their side. You will not have their backs. That is something that can cause tremendous trauma for a child. And again, and the Spirit's book will talk a lot about that. Now, if you think about it, there's been a study on prisoners, and a lot of prisoners don't trust people. The first thing when you work with prisoners, and if you're a psychologist, if you're a social worker, if you're a pastoral care person, you walk into a prison and you want to offer your help to prisoners, and the first thing they'll say is usually, I don't trust anyone. And a lot of them are also diagnosed with ADHD. A lot of prisoners, when they there was a very big study where they did a kind of like a comparison, not a comparison, but they gathered this information on all the mental illnesses for people that were incarcerated, and they found that almost all of them had ADHD, which is impossible. It's statistically impossible for that amount of people to have it. So when they started to really study that, they saw that it wasn't really ADHD, but it was really results of trauma. And the trauma was not their criminal, let's put criminal life or whatever happened there or whatever reason they went into jail, but they dug a little deeper and they saw that it had to do with abandonment. Most of it had to do with trauma, yes, but it had to do with parenting. It had to do with feeling abandoned, trying to trust someone and not really get that. So it's very important to talk about this because, again, sometimes we can think that things that happen to us defines us, but it really is not what happens to us. It's really what we do with what happens to us. And in Spiritism, we know, in question 258, I know Kardec asks, do we have any free will, really? Do we, when we're in a spiritual realm, do we have any conscience? Do we know what's going to happen afterwards, after we decide to reincarnate, or maybe not even decide, but after we reincarnate? And the spirits respond that we choose the type of tests, the types of atonements, the types of expiations that, not really expiations, but what we're going to experience here on earth. So we, most of the time, have chosen what types of situations we'll be going through in this earthly life. So that is so important because a lot of times we come and we are born here in this planet and we put ourselves as victims. A lot of times we look at ourselves as, why was I born? Why am I going through this situation? Does this really have to happen to me? And nobody is born for perdition. Nobody's born here for something bad to happen to them. That is not the case. And a lot of times people believe that the way this question is answered is, oh, so I was born to go through a rape? Was I born to go through natural disaster where I'm going to suffer immensely? Did I really choose that? That's not what the spirits are really saying. What they're saying is, you are born in a general sense to go through energetically, through some type of situation, but it does not have this precise situation that has to happen to you. Nobody's born to be shot. Nobody's born to have to be stabbed at some point. That isn't the point. But you might be born in a place that the probability of that happening is much higher. And with the studies, we'll know why that is. With the studies, we know that there is this beautiful law of cause and effect. So why are we saying this? Is because you do not have to be defined by what happened to you. Again, anything that happens that was a traumatic experience can be such a learning lesson. It could be a point in your life where, yes, you may never be the same person you were before, but that does not have to be a person from that point on which loses their faith, which is a worse person after. But it's a person that will have such more knowledge, perhaps less of a debt that they have acquired in previous lives. And again, this is a very sensitive, and there is not a point here to judge what people go through. What we have to do is have compassion of anyone that goes through any type of trauma. It's not the time to blame, to really seek, to really find out, oh, this person must have done something awful in the past. It isn't. You're not being a spiritist. You're not being exercising compassion when we do that. And we say, because a lot of times we, even as spiritists, we can see someone and immediately think, oh, this person went through this because maybe they have done that to someone else in the past. That does not necessarily is the case. There are a lot of missionaries, spirits. There are a lot of different reasons why someone goes through what they do. But we do react to different experiences in different ways. And that is the point today. Whatever trauma you have gone through, whatever trauma that, it could be something as huge as a physical abuse, but there is no something as small as, because it's really what you make of it, what happened to you after. If you define as yourself as a victim, and I am never be worthy of anything else good happening to me, and you believe that, that can define you from then on. But if you say, I am going to take this and I'm going to start a movement, I am going to start a non-profit based on what have happened to me, that, again, that can be such a learning experience that can change and mold you to something to be a productive part of society, a better person in a way. And again, what happened? We need to have always compassion to anyone that has gone through any types of traumas. Many people believe, and many times we hear people saying, oh, just get over it. Many times we hear people saying, there are so many people that have bigger problems than you. But again, look at what happens to you. Has it distressed? Has it been extreme to a point where you're having a hard time coping with it? And that is, you most likely have been through some type of trauma. Again, when we start to offer compassion, when we start to show people how Spiritism can help cope and deal with traumatic situations, it brings that calmness, it brings that understanding. And that is why it's so beautiful to unite the psychological aspect of how we deal with situations and the spiritual way of how we deal with situations. So again, it is not what happens to you. And yes, it is something that can have an immense impact on anyone. But what you do with what has happened to you is really what will matter in the long term, because that can really make it or break it. It can really help you progress in a way on how you're going to deal with the situation, or it can make you stagnant and maybe even rebel and maybe be a rebel against all things of God, and even put yourself in a victim situation. And God is not one to cause victims. He usually gives us lessons. He usually gives us chances, compassion, So this is my message in this morning coffee for the soul. Again, love those especially who have been through traumatic experiences, because they need, at least, at the very least, the understanding. No judgments, no finger pointing, no thoughts that they are weaker because they're not dealing the way you would have dealt with it. Compassion is a little thing that we need a little more in this world. So I wanted to leave this message about traumas. You can please leave any messages, any comments, any suggestions for future Morning Coffee for the Soul. I thank you again for coming here to listen to a little, usually a 20-minute message on every Sunday morning. I'm just here to pass on a little bit of what has been passed on to me. So nothing is really mine. Everything is someone else that came up with all this, and I try to share it with all of us to get the best that we can get out of these words. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, my friends. Have a wonderful Sunday, and please pay attention. Pay attention to those around you. Pay attention to people that maybe don't want to talk. Sometimes they have a lot to talk about, and we just don't have the ears to listen. Let's listen a little bit. Talking can release a lot of emotional traumas. So let's be there for those who need to talk. Thank you again. Have a wonderful Sunday.